Hello everybody. In today's article I'm going to look at an event that happened back in 1900, quite a tragic event that left boxing, professional boxing in this country, which at the time was quite a fledgling sport, it really had to defend itself. It could have gone under. We're talking about a court case, we're talking about an inquest, we're talking about boxing kind of fighting its own corner, calling on some of its most prestigious supporters to argue the case for its continuation. And it could have gone under at that time, there's absolutely no doubt about that. What was being tested was the legality of the sport, and the way in which it succeeded ultimately in the court case was largely, I think, quite underhand. I think that there was some stretching the truth, covering things up, but it had to do that in order to survive. Now, of course, 1900, we have Queen Victoria on the throne, no lover of boxing, unlike her son, Edward VII, who came just a couple of years later, well, a year later, and he was a great supporter of boxing, and largely as a result of his influence, the sport had quite a good future. But in the last years of Victoria's reign, when, let's be honest, this country was exceedingly wealthy, but it also undoubtedly had sort of high moralistic values, a lot of them based around religion. There was quite an austere attitude to things, especially professional boxing, which at that time largely fought in small hall, well, pubs, and well, quite a big hall in East End of London called Wonderland, where you could go along and watch professionals fighting. It would be a baying audience, lots of gambling and drinking. It'd be a bit like quite a raucous atmosphere, and the sport was uncontrolled. Boxers, the fights were brutal. A lot of boxers suffered great injuries, long-term injuries, it didn't quite fit in with the way the Victorians wanted to look at themselves, where sport at its best was played by amateurs. You're thinking golf, tennis, rugby union, athletics. Nobody got paid for this. There were largely gentlemen doing it. But boxing had come through after the establishment of the Marquess of Queensberry rules in 1867 and the formation of the ABA in 1884. It had kind of come through. The acceptable side of it in Victorian society was the amateur game, where gentlemen in clubs, a lot of which based in London, soldiers in the army and sailors in the navy competed against each other under these new rules with gloves, three-minute rounds, and most contests went the distance, and you scored points much as you would do in, say, a fencing competition. So that side of boxing was acceptable. The professional side, as I say, largely under the influence of the sort of working classes, didn't have quite that same aura, or that certainly didn't have that social acceptability. So as a result of what happened here in 1900, boxing really had to fight its own corner and in order to survive. Now, what happened occurred in the National Sporting Club, at that time the most prestigious club in the country, based in Covent Garden, London. It had been established in 1891, largely by the sort of successful middle classes, people, you know, lawyers, self-made businessmen, accountants, people on the stock exchange, but the sort of people who liked sport at its sharpest end, the sort of people who liked horse racing and perhaps went hunting and the like. They liked to see two men in the ring giving it their all, and they didn't want to see points scored over 9 minutes. They wanted to see a proper 23-minute rounder, well-trained lads fighting for a championship of some sort or another. And that's in fact what happened this night in question in 1900. That was one of the things that was happening there. Well, Lord Lonsdale was the president of the club at that time. There was only 1,200 people fitted into the venue, but they all wore smart clothes. They didn't talk during the boxing, the 3 minutes of the round. Silence. They'd be smoking cigars. They'd probably had a good meal and some fine wines prior to coming to see the boxing. This wasn't your typical audience, but it was a sort of place that could call upon powerful people and influential people when it needed them, which is exactly what it had to do here in January 1900. Now, there had been 2 deaths at the club in the preceding 26 months. A fighter called Walter Crute died at the hands of an American called Jimmy Barry in the 19th of a 20-rounder in December 1897, and the kind of heat was on then. Boxing would be tolerated, I think, providing nothing bad happened. But when there's a ring death like this in a high-profile international contest, it's going to get the authorities and the police especially interested. And if the sport isn't quite guaranteed as being legal, in fact, if that could be tested and it could be found to be illegal, then a lot of people would want to jump on that and put a stop to it. So they somehow got over that, but within 13 months, another boxer died in the same ring at the Covent Garden National Sporting Club. A Londoner by the name of Tom Turner was knocked out by a fellow Londoner, Nat Smith, in a reasonably decent contest. I think it was a 10-rounder, and he died. Heat back on again, somehow got away with it, but it was only 13 months later that this contest took place, and again we had a tragedy. Now the bout was in fact for what was called then the 7 stone 8 pounds championship. There were no 8 weight classes in 1900. You could more or less contend a championship at any weight, 2 pounds apart. So you could box for the 7 stone 8 pounds championship. Somebody else could box for the 7-6. Somebody else for the 7-10, and so on and so forth. Now this contest was between a chap from Glasgow called Mike Riley and a Birmingham fighter from a well-established boxing family called Matt Precious. £100 aside, 15 3-minute rounds, 6-ounce gloves for the 7 stone 8 pounds championship of, at the time that would have been called of England, but it would have primarily that would have meant Great Britain. Now it is interesting that on the day of the contest, as it was reported in the morning by the Sporting Life, it commented that in fact Riley, who was training in Ayrshire in Scotland prior to the contest, his trainer had got him down over a 12-day period from 8 stone 4 to 7 stone 10. Now that's a loss of £8 in 12 days, and that would be considered highly unsafe today. The consequences of dramatic weight loss, particularly quick weight loss immediately before a fight, can lead to major issues with regards to the ability of a boxer to absorb punishment. So it's interesting that this was commented upon on the morning of the contest. Right, the fight took place, as I say, on January the 29th, 1900. I have here the report for it from the Sporting Life. I'll read bits of this so we can get some context. It states that most of the contents at the National Sporting Club last night were short, sharp and decisive. The principal item, one of 15 rounds between Matt Precious of Birmingham and Mike Riley of Glasgow for £100 aside and the 7 stone 8 pounds championship, however, provided the best sport. This is the top of the bill fight. You would expect these are the best 2 fighters, so it's no surprise that this will be considered to be the best contest. It stated that there was a little difference between the lads in weight, only 1 3/4 pounds, but the Scot was the taller of the pair. This, however, made a little difference to the Brum, i.e. fighter from Birmingham, often called Brums or Brummies or Brummagers, who always held the winning hand. If he was shorter, he was sturdier and fought with the confidence of a Briton. Typical reporting from 1900, but there you go. After the first round, the Glasgow man showed a lot of confidence. This is Riley. But Precious was always leading, and the odds of 7-4 laid on him at the start soon lengthened out. Beyond that, Precious was always leading, but there was little to choose between the competence for 6 rounds, but in the 7th, Precious, who swung his right in aggressive fashion, landed on the jaw and knocked Riley down. Now remember this. This is the very next morning. The reporter's been at the club. He is saying here there's a knockdown in the 7th round, and Riley's the man who hits the canvas. Continues. He got up and struggled on manfully, but in the 9th he received 2 hard, remember that as well, 2 hard right-handed knockdown blows. And although the call of time saved him, he failed to come up at the 10th, and Precious was declared the winner. Riley, who was very much used up, was evidently overtrained. If we look at a bit more detail about how this was, that's the sort of general overview that it gives, but there's then a round-by-round report. Now, I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm going to come in actually in the 4th round, and we're going to follow the contest through exactly as it was recorded, because it's quite important in the context of the court case. It states here, the 4th meeting opened with a brisk exchange of blows at close range. Precious forced, but was met with a nasty right. The term nasty the importance of that will become clear, which steadied Riley. After a breather, Riley stepped in and his left flew over his opponent's head. While withdrawing, Matt swung the right on the neck with plenty of force, and then ensued some fast two-handed work. Entering upon the 5th round, Precious was the aggressor, but through the scientific footwork of his rival, little damage was done. A short exchange of blows at close range preceded an attempt with the right from Precious, which only just failed. Keeping up this sort of work, the Birmingham fighter did better when next attempting the same hand. Riley had a shade the best of a rather sharp rally just prior to the interval, and on resuming for the 6th round, he rallied forth with a smart left, which landed flush on the face. Matt did most of the attacking, but found difficulty in getting through his rival's powerful guard. His non-success caused the Brum to become wild, and he swung both hands in erratic fashion. By boring, the last name nearly forced the Glasgow youth through the ropes on 2 occasions, and it was palpable the lad from the hardware capital, Birmingham, was the stronger. Riley improved his position at the commencement of the 7th stage, where Matt, in trying a body hit, struck a trifle low. After this, they remained at close quarters. Taking the centre for the 8th time, Riley made 2 good shots on the face with the left, but in trying a 3rd time, he was heavily countered on the cheek and sent down. Slow to rise, the Scot endeavoured to make the most of the ring, but was pounced upon and received both hands heavily, from which he again tumbled over. Precious kept up a heavy pressure and with a succession of blows had his adversary very distressed. Now this part of the report, which is only few inches, column inches below the overview, is now saying he was knocked down in the 8th round, not the 7th, and he was knocked down twice in the 8th round, whereas earlier on it had stated he was down once in the 7th. So there's an immediate contradiction with the reporter getting his fact. One of these facts has got to be wrong. Anyway, the bout continues, and Precious, as we say, ultimately does not come out for the 10th round. So that's the end of a good contest, good sporting night. Everyone's happy, and unfortunately, the next morning, in the newspapers, we see the same newspaper, Sporting Life. We see the following: the report of the death of Mike Riley of Glasgow in Charing Cross Hospital after being beaten by Matt Precious of Birmingham in a contest which lasted 9 rounds. At the National Sporting Club on Monday night came like a bolt from the blue to most of the spectators who witnessed the struggle. The Scot was not knocked out, and no such fatal result was expected as announced yesterday morning. All the principals, seconds and officials at once gave themselves up to the police, with the exception of Anthony Diamond of Birmingham, who was one of Precious's trainers, who'd left that night on the midnight train. And he's expected to put in an appearance at today's inquest. It then goes on to say, under the headline, Police Court Proceedings. Yesterday afternoon, the defendants were taken before Albert de Rutsen. He's in fact the Chief Magistrate of the Metropolitan Police Court. Now, witnesses are called to describe what had happened, and the first one of which is Subdivisional Inspector Bowles. He's there to give his view on what he thinks happened, because he had received information on the Monday that a contest was to take place at the National Sporting Club that evening, and in accordance with the instructions of the Commissioner of Police, he went to the club at 9 o'clock that evening and cautioned all of the defendants, everybody who was looking to take part in the contest, the 2 boxers and the seconds of both parties, managers, and so on. Now, this seemed to be standard practice. The police are going along to the National Sporting Club every Monday, and they're warning everybody who was taking part in that night's contest that if anything happens and somebody's hurt, they could be in serious trouble. When asked by Mr. de Rutsen, what did you tell them, Bowles replied, I told them that if there was such a glove fight as was likely to be dangerous or to lead to a breach of the peace, or if there was any betting, they would be held responsible. The term is a glove fight likely to be dangerous. Now, this is one in which the men are not standing there for 9 minutes, popping out the left jab, trying to score points against each other. A contest considered to be dangerous would be one in which both participants are looking to knock the other one out. Now, of course, this was what happened every Monday night. All boxing matches, professional boxing matches at that time, were fought much as they are today. The purpose was to win the bout on points if one had to, but if you could stop your man in the interval, at any stage prior to the conclusion of the last round, then that's what you tried to do. And I think that's what they're talking about by likely to be dangerous. And note that it states that it would or will lead to a breach of the peace. The witness went on to say that late on Monday night he received information which caused him to go to Charing Cross Hospital. And on the following morning he went there again and was shown the dead body of a man named Michael Riley. This is the boxer, obviously. He recognised the body as that of one of the men he had cautioned at the club. Witness went to the club and there arrested all the defendants. Now, these defendants are the boxer Matt Precious, the manager of the National Sporting Club, Mr. A.F. Bettinson, Peggy Bettinson, as he's better known, Arthur F. Bettinson, well-respected and well-off individual who's effectively running the affairs at the National Sporting Club. This is a man who is coming from, quite a solid background, so to speak. The referee, Bernard John Angle, also arrested, who is in fact described here as a stockbroker. And then various people connected with the two corners and the camps and the timekeeper and so on and so forth. These are the witnesses. These are the people who potentially could now be charged with a breach of the peace and, at worst, manslaughter. They were all, in fact, remanded for 1 week for £50 each. They had to pay £50, basically covering the fact that they weren't just going to disappear, I suppose. And the inquest was therefore due to take place a few days later. And this was carried out at St Clement Danes Vestry Hall in Clare Market, where John Troutbeck, who was the coroner for the City and Liberty of Westminster, opened the inquiry into the circumstances connected with the death of Michael Riley, aged 19 years, the well-known Glasgow boxer who died on Tuesday morning in Charing Cross Hospital. Now, the report goes on to state that the great public interest was manifested in the proceedings, and over half an hour before the arrival of the coroner, a number of persons collected outside the Vestry Hall gates. The large courtroom itself was inconveniently crowded. So there's great public interest in this. I suppose the press are involved. People who are pro and anti-boxing would be there to make their case, or at least they wouldn't be allowed to take part in the proceedings, but they are there to show what their feelings are about what's happened. And again, Subdivisional Inspector Bowles and an Inspector Pudgley and an Inspector Coleman of Bow Street appeared to watch the case on behalf of Sir Edward Bradford, the Chief Commissioner of Police. And then the Mr. George Lee of the firm Messrs. Lee and Lee, solicitors for the National Sporting Club, appeared on behalf of the club and on behalf of the 9 defendants. A jury of 13 was sworn in, and the first thing they did was go along to Endell Street Mortuary to view the body of the dead fighter. I'm not so sure that jurors in inquests today would have to do that, but this is 1900. And if you're going to be a juror in an inquest, I suppose they make you see the body. You're ultimately going to be ruling on, what's caused the death, and you must be therefore confronted with the person who has died. On return of the jury, the coroner said, "In the case of the man Riley, I only propose this evening to take evidence of identification." That's pretty much what happened. The proceedings they only occupied a few moments, and they were adjourned until the following Friday, 2 days later. So on the 3rd, it's reported that on the previous day, February the 2nd, the inquest, the second day's proceedings took place, and one of the witnesses there is recalled, a man called John Boyle, the tobacconist, who states he was responsible for Riley in terms of training him. And the first I knew of the proposed match, he said, was when I made it myself. He's asked with whom was it made, and he responds, Matt Precious. Was any agreement drawn up? Yes. With whom? With the National Sporting Club. Did you see Precious yourself? No. When did the deceased go into training? about a month before the match. Was he a skilled boxer? Yes. Had you ever seen his opponent before the match? And he says, I cannot say. He then is asked, have you any means of knowing if it was a fair match? And he responds, it was a fair match. When asked what makes you think that, he said, Riley is a good, clever boxer. He's then challenged, but you don't know anything about Precious? And he responds, nothing beyond what I had heard. Now, of course, in these days, there was no YouTube videos to go to. There was no film of boxers at that time. If you wanted to know what your opponent was like, you'd have to go along and look at him, either in his camp illicitly or indeed to have seen him in the ring prior to that. But it would be quite normal for two men to be matched against each other, and each camp would have no real idea of what the box even looked like, let alone what sort of style he boxed under. It was certainly, having never seen it, you'd be looking at asking other people or referring to reports of the contest in things like the Sporting Life and so on. So it's not unusual here for a match to be made between two boxers who would be quite unaware of each other's styles and strengths. He says that before training he weighed 8 stone 1.5, but he got that down to 7'7". He's asked, what part did you take in the proceedings? And he says, well, I was his second. Do you know whether Riley was medically examined before he entered the ring? And in fact, he states that Riley was examined by a doctor at 2 o'clock on the day of the match. And what did he say? And he responds, the doctor said that he was in pretty good condition. Then the witness is asked, will you give, to the best of your recollection, a description of the contest? Now, this is the trainer of Riley, who has had the misfortune to see his boxer die after being knocked down at least twice in a contest that was described as, well, the terms nasty and hard contests and so on were clearly readable in the report of the contest. So this, to me, is going to put him under some degree of pressure if he's trying to prove that the contest was about point scoring and not about deliberately going to knock each boxer deliberately not going to knock each other out. When he's asked, what do you think of the bout? He said, well, the first round, he said, was sharp and light. And the second round was the same sort of exhibition. So he's starting as he means to go on. It was light and it was an exhibition, sort of an exhibition. The third round was just about the same. Again, that's 3 rounds now, all the same. And it says, and the contest continued much the same up until the last 2 or 3 rounds. What he's saying here is for the first 7 or 8 rounds, it was light and a bit like an exhibition. The coroner then asks, up to the time of the last 2 or 3 rounds, were the men equal? And his response is yes. You think they'd made equal points? Yes, I did. What did you notice afterwards? And he says, I thought that Riley got excited and nervous. What do you think of his strength? He appeared to be still strong. He was excited, and I told him to take his time and come away. What do you say about the blows? And he says, very light. No serious blows were struck. There was a lot of quick head work, and when Riley came to his corner, I asked him how he felt, and he answered very sharply, all right. And at the beginning of the 10th round, when time was called, Riley raised himself on his legs and sat down again, and then he made another motion, and Mr. Angle stopped the contest at once. What did you think then of Riley's condition? And he responds, he was not well. When Mr. Angle gave the decision, he just seemed to faint away. Riley was taken to the dressing room and seen by a doctor and was then removed to the Charing Cross Hospital. So the trainer of Riley is saying here that the blows, there were no serious blows, they were all very light. It was even up to the point where he got nervous and excited and then collapsed. He's asked directly, do you think Riley was overweighted? And he says no. During the contest, was Riley knocked down? And his answer is no. Now that's in direct contradiction to the reporter of the contest that stated that he got knocked down either once in the 7th or twice in the 8th. Now he must have known if his boxer in his charge was knocked down. Either the reporter's seen 1 or 2 knockdowns that simply never happened, or he's lying to the coroner. He's lying under questioning and saying that he was not knocked. In fact, he's saying that nobody was knocked down, I think. We then got on to the padding of the ring, and he's he said he staggered on the ropes in the fourth round, but the floor of the ring is padded with felt. Now then, Bettinson, the manager of the sporting club, is called, and he states, "I am the manager of the National Sporting Club and arranged the boxing agreement between the two teams. How do you account for the condition of the dead man?" And he responds, "I was really surprised. Can you explain his condition?" He says, "Yes, he was fanned in his corner and then he fainted." The coroner says, "I should say that the cause of death was a hemorrhage of the brain caused by the rupture of a blood vessel." And Bettinson says, "Then the vessels must have been very weak." But the medical gentleman of the opinion that they were not, but normal. "I did not see any heavy blows struck. The lads were too clever." They then get in a bit of a debate about boxers being hit and what could constitute how a point scored, and what, is there likely to be damage from blows. And Bettinson's kind of very elusive about wanting to allude to the fact that these men were actually trying to hurt each other. In fact, he then goes on to say, "I did not see anything that could be described as heavy hitting. It was a clever scientific contest." He's then asked about the weight of the gloves, and he states that yes, the gloves were alike. They are produced in sets. These gloves for this particular contest were 6 ounces. He confirms, but then he goes on to say, "We used to have 4-ounce gloves, but then we increased them to 6 ounces. And that, I think, is in reference to what had happened with the deaths of Turner and Walter Crute. I think that they sort of increased the size of the gloves just to ensure, because 4-ounce gloves really are, you can do a lot of damage with 6-ounce gloves, particularly horsehair gloves, the gloves they boxed under in those days. So they have at least made an attempt to increase the weight of the gloves, and they've also made an attempt to further improve the padding underneath the ring canvas. And he's challenged on this, and he's asked, "The platform where the contest takes place, is it padded?" And Bettinson says, "Yes, we have 3 layers of padding, which is basically felt." "Do you produce a specimen of the bedding of the ring floor?" He says, "Yes. I understand there were 3 layers of felting, and over the whole there was then a canvas. And this is in fact confirmed, and furthermore that the ropes are also padded, and that the size of the ring is 16 feet. They then call the referee, Bernard John Angle. He's asked, "Did you notice the condition of the men on their entering the ring?" And Angle says, "Yes, I generally do." A good referee is going to look the lads up and down prior to the fight, checking to see what sort of mood they're in, what he needs to look for in terms of boxers being nervous, or if there's a disparity in weight or size, height, that sort of thing. He's going to want to referee the bout accordingly. He's asked, "What do you think about the boxers?" And he said, "Well, I thought Riley looked slightly overtrained." He said, "Well, how did he show that?" And he says, "Possibly by the colour of the skin." "Was he fine drawn, below his proper weight?" And he says, "Yes, I thought so." So this is an indication here that the referee is probably thinking this kid is overtrained. He's struggled to make the weight. He's noticed his skin colour isn't right. So what with the weight loss prior to the bout, what we're looking at here, I think, is undoubtedly a case of dehydration. And that is really quite a major problem for a boxer who's in that kind of condition, as it would be today. And the referee's directly alluding to the fact that he's noticing this. He says, what about the colour of the skin?" He says, "Well, what did you notice about it?" He says, "The colour was not of a healthy tint." "Was there anything else you noticed about him?" He says, "Nothing." He said, "What about the other man, Precious? What did you consider about him?" And he said, "I considered him to be in perfect condition." "You say perfect condition?" He says, "Yes." "You have absolute power as to the contest under these printed rules?" He says, "Yes, I have." And he says, "Noticing that the condition of Riley was overtrained and that his skin was not of the proper tint, why did you allow the contest?" He says, in my opinion, although slightly overtrained, he was quite fit to undertake the contest. He said, though slightly overtrained, you thought he was perfectly fit to undertake the contest? He said, yes. He said, do you award marks during the contest? And he then produces his scorecard. And he scores rounds really on the... It's not the 5-point must system, but like we have today. But he's scoring 5 points maximum, sometimes 4, sometimes 3, and he totals it up as he goes along. But when challenged, what do you award the points on? The referee says, on the skill in the attack, one man took the initiative, and it was more on that ground. You mean he delivered blows too? And he says, yes. And did Riley avoid them? And he says, Riley was very skillful. Did Precious get in? And he says, yes, he did occasionally. In the 7th round, he says, you marked 4 and 5, and in the 8th round, 5 and 5. Now, these were the 2 rounds that we think 1 or 2 knockdowns occurred in. And he says, at the 8th round, Riley was 6 points less than his opponent. He's challenged, and he says, yes, that is correct. So he says, he's asked, was there anything in the contest you noticed that was not indicated by this card? And he says, the contest was chiefly noticeable by the small amount of punishment received by Riley. So the referee is saying Riley didn't really receive much punishment. Arthur Bettinson is saying for sort of 8 or 9 rounds, it was a light contest, fought more or less on the lines of an exhibition. And in fact, Riley's trainer is also saying much the same. Firstly, he was saying nothing really happened, and it was skillful, light blows, and all the rest of it. We think this was a proper boxing match, a tough contest with knockdowns that aren't being alluded to at all by anybody. Bettinson comes back and says he's called again, and he's asked when the last fatal contest took place, which was in November 1898, and he said yes, that would be 15 months ago. The coroner asks, since that time, what steps have been taken in the direction of removing causes of danger? And Bettinson again alludes to the size of the gloves and the exhaustive medical examination that has to take place before the men are allowed to enter the ring. And that the number of rounds for contests, not of major championship contests, but of most of the top-line contests at the club, had been reduced from 20 to 15 rounds. Now, the club then kind of bring before the coroner a number of sort of, shall we say, kind witnesses, people who were at the fight that the club have asked to go along and represent them. One of them is, in fact, Mr. Alfred Darling, who was an ex-chief inspector of the Metropolitan Police. And he says, I attend the National Sporting Club to assist the management in keeping order. I was present on the night of the contest in front of the balcony very near the competitors. I was about 15 feet away and could see well. I saw the men box a number of rounds, and about the 6th round I said to a friend, Riley is the winner, easily. He'd punished Precious much more about the body than than Precious had done to him. There was a lot of redness about Precious's chest, and then I saw Precious hit Riley, and he went down on one knee near the ropes and close by the referee. When he's asked where did he hit him, he says, I really could not say. He said Riley got up and continued to box. And in the 8th round, Precious appeared the stronger man. And in the next round, Riley went to his seat with a very slight mark over his left eye. It was nothing. He did not, however, continue the fight, and I should have backed Riley. He then says, he's then asked, was it a very light contest? Was there any hard punishing? And he responds, oh, the lads were too light to do much harm. So, in your opinion, is that a light contest? He said, yes, 10 stone men would inflict severe punishment. I.e., these guys at 7 stone 8 aren't going to inflict severe punishment. Now, I think a 10 stone man receiving punishment would be capable of withstanding, from a 10 stone man, would be no more capable of withstanding punishment than would 2 men at 7, 8. If you're equally matched and one of you is a hard hitter, punishment is punishment. And I don't think you could say just because you're 10 stone that you know, you can deliver punishment, but a man 2 stone lighter couldn't. But that's what he said. And then a surgeon of Maddox Street in London is called Mr. E. Jackson Lang, who says, I examined the men at 2 o'clock on the day of the contest at the National Sporting Club, and he says he didn't think that Riley was in such good condition as the other man was, and he didn't box so well and appeared to be finer, but he was certainly in good health and quite fit to box. And he states that nothing, having examined him, he didn't see anything to prevent his going into the ring. Nothing at all. He says that the contest, in fact, having witnessed it, he describes as a very light one. So that's 2 nice witnesses, one of whom is a surgeon, one of whom is an ex-police officer. Both of them are saying this, again, confirming everything that the trainer, the manager, the referee has said. It's a light contest. Another surgeon, Reginald Wilson, says that he, in fact, wow, this is when the body goes to Charing Cross. Now, so Riley's now taken to Charing Cross Hospital. He's collapsed, and the surgeon that receives him there states that when he was admitted, he was unconscious, and his heart was beating feebly, but he was not comatose. He remained in much the same condition until 2 in the morning, when he got a little better, and I had hopes of his life. But when I first saw him, I had hopes of his life, although the case was very serious. And he's asked, did he become worse after? Yes, soon afterwards there was a change, this time for the worse. The deceased gradually lapsed into complete unconsciousness and died soon after. He's asked, was he quite fit to undergo prolonged exertion as a boxer? And he said, yes, in my opinion he was. He's asked, what was the cause of death? And he states it was concussion of the brain and a hemorrhage, but the symptoms of concussion would come on first. Do you think a blow from these gloves or a violent fall on the head, on his head onto the floor, would be more, which of the two would be most likely to inflict violence? He said, well, yes, more especially the gloves, because the momentum of the blow would be lost before you could get on so well padded a floor as that. So he's kind of identifying the fact that the ring canvas is so well padded that if you're going to receive, if either hitting that or being hit by a 6-ounce glove, which of the two is more likely to cause a hemorrhage? He's saying it's basically the punch. And he's asked, taking into consideration what you noticed about this man's general condition and the condition of the arteries, do you think a slight blow or a severe one would be necessary to produce that hemorrhage? And he says, I think a blow such as I myself have seen given in boxing competitions would be sufficient without its being necessarily a severe blow. So this man is also indicating, and he wasn't at the fight, he's probably got no interest in boxing, but he's kind of suggesting that you wouldn't necessarily need a severe blow to cause the sort of hemorrhage that Riley has suffered. Matt Precious is called, a boxer, and he basically obviously says he's very sorry that this has occurred, and he cannot recollect any hard blow that was likely to cause Riley's death. He is asked, do you remember striking your opponent any hard blow? And he says no. And he's asked, did he avoid you by his dodging and slipping? He says yes. Did you receive any violent blows from the deceased? None at all, sir. Not in any of the rounds? No, sir. You did not regard the contest as a knocking out one? Certainly not, sir. You regarded it purely as a scientific contest? Yes, sir, I did. You've taken part in a good many contests, have you not? Yes. And had more punishment than you received in this? Yes, he says, it was a scientific contest. So he's then released from the stand. He's gone up and said neither of them threw a hard blow. It was all scientific. And again, this is another crucial witness. All of the defendants, in fact, pretty much thus far, have said the same thing. And they're obviously all very, very concerned. The magistrates are going to think that, you know, this was not a contest of skill. It was a contest within which, a knocking out contest, as it's referred, where the boxer is deliberately trying to beat his opponent inside the distance. As we all know, he was, but they could not possibly demonstrate that because if the boxer then is seriously injured or dies, he could be charged with manslaughter. Now the verdict is then announced, and the National Sporting Club are completely exonerated. After 5 minutes consultation, the jury, these are these 13 people who've been to see the body, stated that they had a unanimous verdict. This is 5 minutes. And the foreman asks them, have you arrived without difficulty or hesitation at a verdict? What is your verdict? We are all agreed that it was a case of accidental death, and that the National Sporting Club took every precaution in its power to prevent the regrettable accident, and therefore they're all discharged. The funeral of Mike Riley takes place very shortly afterwards. There was a huge number of people lining the streets effectively to see the body leaving his house. There's quotes here of even 30,000 people, which I think probably well exaggerated, but even so, he was only 19 years old, but he was obviously well loved in the area in which he lived within Glasgow. But meanwhile, the criminal proceedings, the magistrates have still got to look at this. They know what the result of the inquest is, but they've still got to decide for themselves whether something criminal has happened. So now at Bow Street Magistrates Court, the 5th day's proceedings are opened about 2 weeks after the inquest ends. It states here, yesterday, Wednesday, at the Bow Street Police Court before Mr. de Rutsen, the presiding magistrate, the adjourned hearing of the charge against the 10 defendants in the Riley case was resumed. The first witness called was E. Lang of Maddox Street, who we've already heard from. He is the one who was engaged by the club to examine Precious and Riley prior to the contest. He said, I've examined many men before at the club, and as to Precious, he was in very good condition. And he's asked about Riley. He comments on their height, first of all. Riley 5'3", Precious 5'1.5". He says they're both fit to fight. And up to the 6th round, it appeared, he said, because he watched the fight, an ordinary contest. He then said he had a good view and the men were fairly matched, but that he didn't see a great deal of dodging going on the part of Precious, but on the part of Riley, who was doing a tremendous amount of dodging. Now, I presume this is slipping punches, head work, defensive boxing. He says the amount that he was doing would naturally exhaust a man. He was constantly dodging and using his head. Now, using his head, this doesn't mean going in headbutting like it would today. This is evading blows by head movement. And at that time, he was starting to return blows successfully. He was trading blows. But in one of the later rounds, he went down on one knee. What made him fall, he's asked. He hadn't fallen before in the contest. And he said, well, it was either a blow or it was a fall. When asked which of it, was it a blow or a fall, he says, I couldn't say. How long did he remain on his knees? Oh, a few seconds. What did he do then? He resumed the boxing, and he appeared to be as vigorous as he was before. And he's asked, what was his condition? He says, well, he after he collapsed, he became unconscious. And I attended to him and found that one eye was dilated and the other contracted. And he says, what's that a sign of? And he says, a brain injury. And in consequence of his condition, I ordered the removal of the man to the hospital, although I didn't go to the hospital myself. He was then asked during the whole of the contest, did you see any hard blow of any kind struck? No, he said, the contest he would describe again as a light one. Do you agree that the contest was conducted as an exhibition of skill and nothing else? Yes, certainly. They're all singing from the same hymn sheet, and who can blame them, given what's at stake? Again, we have some friendly witnesses. People who've attended the fight. One of them states here he's the manager of the booking office at the Haymarket Theatre. And on the night of the contest, he was present at this club as the guest of another member. So this is a non-member. He was sitting 3 seats back from the ring. He's asked, did you have a good view? He said, yes, very good. In the 8th round, what happened? He said, I noticed that Riley, who all through had been doing a great deal of head work, You mean by that avoiding blows? He said, yes. And in the 8th round, I saw Riley go down on one knee. But he got up again a few seconds later and went on with the fight. Now, the reports said he either went down in the 7th or he went down twice in the 8th. Everybody here seems to be suggesting it's the 8th round, but nobody seems to have seen a second knockdown. He's asked who appeared to be getting the best of the fight up to the 8th round, and he says Precious on points. He describes Riley as very agile and received very little punishment. Then Alfred Darling, the ex-inspector of police, is called again, and he states he's asked what happened in the 7th round, and he said Riley went down on one knee. So now he's saying the 7th round, only moments after the earlier witnesses said the 8th. He said, what made him fall? He says, I can't say whether it was a blow or a slip. This is the second time when directly challenged. These people who are right at ringside are saying the same thing. I don't know. It was either a blow or a slip. It must have been a blow, but neither of them want to say so. He was asked again, how would you describe the contest? Oh, it's a very light one. There was no heavy hitting. Oh, then it was remarkable for the lightness of the hitting? Yeah. He said, oh, yes. But you said that each man wanted to win. Do you mean to get points? Oh, yes. Points by skill? Yes. He says, he's asked, Riley was very excited throughout the best part of the contest. He showed his excitement when he left his corner to meet his opponent. Do you agree that he was excited and short of breath during the contest? Yes, he was excited. So, excited, nervous are the words that are being brought up again and again, not under the effects of hard punches, which is almost certainly what Riley's condition actually was. He's asked, would you think he was short of breath? He says, I couldn't say. Excitement, you say, may have contributed to the cause of death? How? By congesting the arteries of the brain. So the suggestion here is that you could have a hemorrhage by the arteries of the brain becoming congested because a boxer is excited and nervous, not because he's probably suffering from dehydration, has been on the receiving end of some hard blows to the head. The magisterial decision is then reached, and Mr. de Rutsen makes it very clear that in his view this was not an exhibition of skill. There is the potential here for this to be a contest within men who were seeking to deliberately harm each other, despite all of the witnesses from the National Sporting Club saying the same thing. In his view, this needs to go before a jury in the High Court, and the defendants are therefore sent for trial at the Old Bailey. So Mr. de Rutsen's, I don't think he's really taken in by everything he's heard about all these light blows and excitement and nervousness and points of skill and so on and so forth. He's under no illusions that this is a contest where the men were trying to, for money, professionals, for a championship, effectively trying to hurt each other, and therefore if one of them suffers death, as has happened, then Precious and everyone associated with the bout could be sent for to answer a case of manslaughter. And therefore they then go to trial, and it turns up at the Old Bailey the following month, only a couple of weeks later in fact. They appear before the Old Bailey, and it's quite remarkable what then happens. The jury is sworn in, and the common sergeant addresses the jury, and this is one of the officials in the court, the common sergeant. He calls their attention to the fact that the calendar contains several cases of manslaughter, although none of them, he added, he was happy to say, of any special gravity. However, one of the cases that's going to come before you concerns a number of persons who stood committed for trial on a charge of manslaughter, and to that later on he should have to call their special attention. The parties in question were charged with being accessories to a sparring match with gloves, in which one of the combatants lost his life. Although they stood legally committed for trial, yet it was not the same as if they stood committed for trial for taking an actual part in the contest which caused the death. And later on in his charge, Sir Forrest Fulton dealt specifically with the National Sporting Club case, and then thus addressed the grand jury, "Now, gentlemen, the next case is one giving rise to a question of great nicety. A man named Precious and 9 others are committed to take their trial here on the offence of manslaughter. That is to say, with unlawfully causing the death of one Mike Riley, a professional boxer, and the circumstances of the case arose out of a fight with gloves. In other words, a sparring match at the National Sporting Club in King Street, Covent Garden on the 29th of January last. It was what he calls a light contest. That is, no hard blows being given by either of the contestants, and that in fact it was nothing more than an exhibition of skill. Be that as it may, several rounds were fought by these two persons, and at the end of the 9th round of the fight, the deceased man Riley went down on his knees and was not able to come up to time. Accordingly, he was conveyed to the Charing Cross Hospital and died at about 8:45 on the following morning. The cause of death when the post-mortem examination was made showed that it was a hemorrhage of the brain, but even in the opinion of the gentleman making the post-mortem, it might have been any ordinary blow and not necessarily a severe blow that caused the death. And several of the witnesses, moreover, deposed to the fact that no hard knockdown was given during the process of the contest. Now, it is very difficult to say in a case of that kind whether the offence of manslaughter is committed or not. It is quite certain that if anyone is responsible, all are responsible, because if the fight, although not unlawful in its inception, became unlawful in the way in which Lord Bramwell puts it, at a later stage, then not only the principal, but everyone present in the eyes of the law are an accessory and as such amenable in the eyes of the law. He then says, for my own part, after very carefully looking at the depositions, I must say I entertain a very grave doubt whether any jury could convict these persons of manslaughter. But on the other hand, the principle involved is a very important one. Of course, one would not like to discourage any exhibitions of skill with gloves. Our national mode of defence is with the fists. It is, in short, our English way of resenting a wrong. Different nations have different methods, but ours is not common to foreign nations who do not use the fists as we do, but rather have recourse to weapons, such as, for instance, the knife. Be that as it may, at the same time great care must be taken that the strict points of legality are not overstepped, and having regard to that circumstance, although I entertain a very strong doubt as to what constitutes the illegality here, if any at all, I should advise you to find a true bill. The case, let me point out, was very thoroughly investigated by the learned police magistrate who tried it, and he thought it was one to refer to a jury. Now, immediately, shortly after 11 o'clock, at the conclusion of his charge, the grand jury retires, and at about 3:45 in the afternoon, they returned to court with a batch of decisions, and the foreman stated that they had thrown out the bill against all of the defendants. The announcement was made with the usual quiet formality, and only those officials and others familiar with the practice of the court really knew what had transpired. Hence the absence of any demonstration of any kind in the building itself. The news, however, soon spread, and the defendants, as they left the precincts of the Old Bailey, came in for some hearty cheering. So we've had a contest where a man's died. He's probably dehydrated. He's been examined and found some concerns on the part of those who examined him and the referee that he looks overtrained, drawn, skin doesn't look right. He is knocked down at least twice. The report of the contest is stating, these were some heavy blows, some nasty punches and so on and so forth. It was a straightforward, normal 15-round contest, that took place every Monday at the National Sporting Club between men quite clearly trying to beat each other for a championship. It goes before the Magistrates Court, it goes before the inquest. All the witnesses on the part of the National Sporting Club, everybody who took part in it, the manager, the referee, the opposing boxer, various people who were at the contest, the trainer of Mike Riley even, all saying light contest, exhibition of skill, but without those men standing up at times when there was a lot of ill feeling towards boxing. It's considered a brutal, unmanly, uncivilized thing to happen in the middle of Covent Garden on a Monday night by so many people. But the game did survive, and it became obviously the sport that we still have today, where we have so many people even today still anti-boxing. We always have had that. It is not a safe sport, quite obviously, but it's one that without it, well, what's the alternative? It goes underground. So many boxers I know who, if it wasn't for the fact they could have had a good professional career, come from the sort of backgrounds and areas where drugs are rife, crime is rife, people are fighting with knives now, not fists, and like it or lump it, boxing is a sport that is much loved in this country. And without this case in 1900 and the way in which it was handled by the defendants, who knows, the game could have gone under. But it hasn't. Thank you.